In this module, we'll be doing a thorough overview of event planning and programming for your student organization. To begin, some things that we want you to keep in mind when planning any sort of events on or off campus are listed here. First is to plan ahead. I cannot stress this enough, but things when you're planning events and programming for an organization take a long time. So please make sure you're thinking ahead and planning. Along with this includes following all the event planning guidelines. We'll be going over those guidelines and processes in this video. They're also available in the student organization handbook for you at any time. Remember to think through all of the event details that are going to be required for your particular event. These will often vary depending on the type of event or the scale. Make sure you're maintaining very good constant communication with university events, student engagement, and your club or organization. Remember that it's your event and it's your responsibility to reach out and keep that communication going. Oftentimes, other departments will get very, very busy and may lose sight of things. So it's your responsibility to keep following up and make sure your event happens. Once the event comes around, really, we want you to have fun. That's what the point of these organizations is about. So make sure you enjoy it. And then afterwards, that you take the time to reflect and share on the lessons you learned. While there are other training modules available that give a comprehensive overview of club funding and budgets, these are a few points to keep in mind when thinking about event planning. First off, doing annual marathon funding, you need to make sure you request enough funding for your event during that process. There are a lot of things that you have to pay for as an organization that you might not think of. Again, we'll cover those in this video and in the student org handbook, but really making sure that you have asked for sufficient funds during that time. If you end up needing supplementary funding, that's okay, and you can request that from the allocations board, but it must be done at minimum 4 weeks prior to the start of your event. Things that the funding must cover include food and drinks, table and chair rentals, any decorations or giveaways or things that you're going to be giving out, contracts if you're paying anyone else to come, and more. Things that you do not need to budget for as an event are, as a club, are BEMCO coverage, public safety coverage, MTS or media and technology services, providing video or audio support at your event, and custodial fees. These are all taken from the student activity fee in a lump sum at the beginning of the year, so you don't need to budget for them per event. Getting into the other first thing you should be considering when event planning, which is reserving a space. You can reserve a space as early as up to 1 year prior to your event. And this is highly recommended for large scale events, especially if you're planning to use Levin Ballroom or Sherman Function Hall. Something to note is that there are a variety of forms or locations for you to reserve a space on campus, and these depend on the location that you're trying to use. So in a different module, we have links to all the different space reservation forms that are through either university events, DSE, student engagement for reserving the Shapiro Campus Center, athletics, or community living. There's all of these different forms, but all of these different specifications we'll get into apply to all of these forms. Reservations must be finalized at least 4 weeks prior to your event. Again, this is especially for large scale events, but even for meetings and recurring rehearsals or practices or recurring events, they should be finalized far in advance. A full list of spaces, if you're unsure of where to use, that's available on the university events website. And as I mentioned, links to the other reservation forms are available in a different module as well as in the student org handbook. A few notes about reserving spaces with university events, which is the majority of your spaces are going to go specifically through UEO. After submitting a space request form to university events, please note that you will receive a tentative reservation email. This does not mean your reservation is finalized. Once you get that tentative reservation, it's your responsibility to follow up by emailing UEO at studentrequest@brandeis.edu, or you can respond directly to that confirmation email in order to set up a short meeting with UEO to confirm all of your event details. As I said, all events are set as tentative until you have this meeting or follow up to finalize those details with UEO staff. Now we're getting into those event details, and the next few slides will cover really all of the specifics that might come up with an event that you're planning. You won't necessarily need to think about all of these for every event, but they are things that you should be asking yourself if they're going to apply to your event and where to find that information. The first is food and drinks. We do have an additional training module about food and drinks, so I won't go super in depth, but the main things to consider is whether or not you are going to provide food or drinks, and then whether or not you're going to order from on campus or from an external caterer. The second is rentals. The primary things student orgs would rent are tables and chairs, but you might also need tablecloths, a stage, etc. All of these are going to be rented through university events when you're finalizing the event details with them. For contracts, there is another training module for contracts as well. But just a quick note is that really what contracts are used for is if you're paying someone external to Brandeis to come perform some sort of service for your event. So really think about if this is applicable to you, and if so, consult the handbook or that additional training module. A few more details about rentals that a lot of people don't necessarily know. When you're renting tables and chairs, there is a delivery fee that covers that delivery as well as the cost of fuel for any table and chair rentals. So it doesn't matter if you're just ordering 5 chairs or 10 tables or 100, that cost is going to be the same. So please keep that in mind. You also must schedule a delivery window for those items to be delivered. And you should have the space that you're planning to use reserved for that delivery time as well. Rentals can be dropped off anytime between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And if you want an exact delivery time that's not that 4-hour window, you are able to request that, but it might cost more. So as I said, make sure you reserve your space, not just for the hours of your event, but for any sort of setup and delivery and cleanup as well, and potential practices or rehearsals. More event details to consider is public safety. This will be assigned by university events, really based on whether or not you have a high-profile speaker or guest, any sort of risk factors, or more than 200 people, especially including external guests at your event. There's an additional training module that covers risk and off-campus travels that we'll get more into detail about that, but that's something to note is that sometimes event planning means planning for something off campus, not just at Brandeis. Then ticketing. So in the past, we've used a ticket booth for ticketing. It now exists on campus groups. And so when you're creating your event in the event approval form, if you decide you're going to sell tickets, which again, note that this can only be for external guests, you're not allowed to charge Brandeis students, that if you're ticketing, you will do that through the event approval form on campus groups. The final things to note are, do you need any sort of audio or video support at your event? There are a couple ways to go about doing this, and those are detailed in the handbook as well. Those are through SPS or Student Production Services that can help with speakers, microphones, and lights. If you're trying to do anything with video support or Zoom options, that would be going through MTS or Media and Technology Services. So think through those details and whether or not you'll need either of those services for your event. A photographer. So DSC or student engagement has student photographers that we hire that you're able to contract for your event. So think through if you want to have professional photos taken and work with student engagement to make that happen. Finally, your decorations, your giveaways, anything like this, flyers that you're going to have at your event, those are your responsibility to think through and to budget for as well, and figure out how you're going to put those up Make sure you're following all of the decoration guidelines listed in the handbook and on the Brandeis website so that you know that you're going to be respectful of the space and follow all the rules. Just to break it down for you, for what university events is responsible for doing in event planning versus what the student, you, or the club is responsible for doing. First off, you all are responsible for filling out the space request form, and then university events will go about reserving the space for you and creating a space layout. And then you'll work with them to finalize that layout and finalize any of those details that we talked about. In terms of those details, university events will order rentals for you. They'll work with MTS and contact them if you need MTS. They'll also request public safety or BEMCO presence and custodial coverage for your event if any of those apply. What you are responsible for is ordering any food, whether that's through on-campus catering or off-campus, and any linens that you'll need for that, and also silverware and plates and stuff like that. Your group's responsible for managing the contracts for your event, also filling out the SPS request form if you need them, which is linked in the student org handbook, and making sure you put in all your information on campus groups, both for posting for your event and for all the payment requests to pay for your event. Finally, posting on campus groups. There's an additional module about marketing and advertising your event, but one of the key things that's required for you is to be able to post your upcoming event on campus groups at least 3 weeks before your event. So this is both to help student engagement and university events and other departments know what's going on with your organization and make sure that everything is in place. It's also to help you promote it to the Brandeis campus community through using this platform. As I said, advertising your event and marketing, there's more details about this, about tabling, about using social media and kind of best practices, hanging flyers and such around campus. That's a different training module. Once you get to the day of your event, there's a few things to keep in mind. First off is to make sure you allow for enough time to set up for your event and reserve the space for that setup time, whether that's a different day or the morning of your event. And then when you're cleaning up, please make sure that you leave the space cleaner than you found it. It's really to be respectful of our custodial staff and also to make sure your organization doesn't get fined by doing any sort of damage or making a huge mess in the space you're using. Please note that University Events has an on-call phone number available that's on the screen. It's also in the handbook, and this is only for weekends to be able to use this number. If you're having an event during the work week and between 9 to 5, you can always call that number as well to reach University Events. And on weekdays after 5 p.m., you should call the public safety non-emergency line for any sort of help with your event. Please keep in mind what you would consider an emergency versus not when it comes to your event and act accordingly. And then, as we said, enjoy your event. That's really what this is all about. Take it all in, be in the moment, take photos, and really just enjoy all the hard work that you've put in. After your event happens, we really encourage you to reflect on the event, to discuss it with both your e-board and your club, maybe request feedback from attendees to really get a sense of what went well, what could be improved upon, what could you share with future club leaders to make this event even more successful in the future. Definitely write down these thoughts. The transition guide can be a great way to do this. And make sure you share down that information that you learned and your thoughts with future club leaders. This is a general overview of planning events. Please note that there are other modules to get more in depth into certain aspects of event planning, and reach out to student engagement or to university events if you have any additional questions.